Welcome to UPARS. I'm Alex Mistretta. I'm standing in for Steve Murillo tonight. Our speaker for tonight is Joanne Richards. She's going to talk about Knights of the Cold War inside the secret space program. I don't have a bio for her, so she's going to come up here and do her intro herself. Thank you for coming. Joanne?
Anyway, I believe that there are many Cold War heroes who have served their countries and humanity and cannot talk about it. My father-in-law, Ellis Lloyd Richards, Jr., and my husband, Mark Richards, are two such heroes. And today I'm going to share highlights with you from several talks that I give. I'm going to tell you their bios, who they are, because it speaks to who they are. Where they came from, about the Orion deep space fleet that our government has, and different species that my husband's been around and that have worked with our militaries, and different on and off planet missions that my husband's been involved with. And if we have time, we'll get into some paranormal stuff, but we'll see. Okay, so Ellis Lloyd Richards Jr. is my father-in-law. The handsome guy on the other side is my husband, Captain Mark Richards. And from a report about the Dulce base, we read that Richards' names come up time and time again when one looks into any of the mentioned top secret projects that military intelligence or the eyes-only top secret agency known as International Security were involved from World War II through the Cold War years. So my husband's paternal grandfather was Ellis Lloyd Richards Sr. He was a brilliant electronics engineer. He worked with Tesla. He worked on the Manhattan Project and on the Philadelphia experiment. In fact, both of Mark's grandfathers worked with Nikola Tesla. Grandpa Richards was a leading expert in the early push for space flight. He worked on several think tanks, and that conducted underground research for the U.S. He invented the Richards antimatter drive the Richards antimatter drive in the late 30s. My father-in-law, Ellis Lloyd Richards Jr., grew up in Illinois and Michigan. He spent summers, now this is summer camp for him, with Tesla, Goddard, Hubble, Henry Coanda on their assorted projects, and including a disc-shaped craft that was using his father's RAM drive engine. Tesla trained both Junior and Senior Richards in his secrets from electronics to time travel. Junior, my father-in-law, tested many of his projects, including the famous death ray. And before World War II broke out, on 2 trips to Germany, my father-in-law was shown Germany's big secrets, their military secret facilities, and the aircraft that they were working on, and their spacecraft, because they were hoping that he would defect and become a Nazi officer, as his lineage is from Germany. He chose not to, and he reported those secrets to Washington. He was fluent in several languages. He got degrees in business administration and the law, so he was also a JAG officer. In 1940, as a teenager, he was involved in the American Southwest with the aliens and Nazis, and that was the beginning of when the Dulce base was starting to be constructed. He was a top-notch fighter pilot, a flight instructor, and a test pilot. He was involved with everything high-level military intelligence after World War II. And as I said, he was doing stuff as a teenager, so he's been around this his whole life. Everything he did after World War II was, he was stationed places where there was UFO activity, so everything he did was UFO related. I have his orders where I live, and they're all marked secret, top secret, classified. He was stationed all around the world. And he was involved in many missions to missions after World War II to retake control of the Afghan and Tibetan dimensional gates from the Nazis. And he participated in Operation High Jump in 1947 with Admiral Byrd. He was called the Dutchman. He was part of the fighter mafia. And these were men that were highly trained and that the most secret organizations went to when there was international security issues and when an enemy had to be stopped by either air or space power. He flew flying saucers that were built for our Air Force by Avro Company in Canada. In August of 1952, he was stationed at Hamilton Air Force Base, which is in Novato, California, about 20 minutes north of San Francisco. And in 1952, the officers and their wives are at the pool. It's not far from where I live. It's all residential now, but the pool is still there. And all of a sudden the alarm goes off and they see 6 to 8 flying saucers coming right to the base. The alarms go off. And of course the men all have to run down to the hangars and go deal with whatever it is. And out of his hangar, my father-in-law comes out in a flying saucer. Yeah, because there were 3 bases on each coast that had a squad of flying saucers that were part of the US Air Force. Now, the base commander's wife said, now ladies, we won't, obviously we can't tell anybody what we just saw. And thankfully all the men came back, and then 1 more flying saucer came back. And the hull opens up and out walks this very elegant Raptor, which I'll describe later, but it's a reptilian, and he came as an ambassador for their empire because their empress had decided it was time they try to start working with the humans instead of just eating us. So that is how my father-in-law met Prince Naga. They became really good friends. They worked together for many, many years. Prince Naga is still alive, still here on Earth. And as you'll find out later, my husband and one of Naga's sons became very good friends. So father-in-law, we called him, well, I never met him, but anyway, his nickname is Rich. He was at the center of events for Operations Mainbrace, which was in September of 1952, when the RAF and the US militaries were actually fighting UFOs over the North Sea. He was involved with the events involving creatures from space and the Pacific Ocean. He was the first person to pilot a Rand atomic rocket in the late 40s. He also flew German discraft, and he captured alien saucers. He was the Air Force intelligence officer who met with aliens at Holloman Air Force Base. He was military intelligence with NATO. He was military intelligence liaison with the president. He and President Kennedy were very close friends. He was one of the co-founders of the National Reconnaissance Office. He officially retired from the Air Force in 1966. And he took over an international security agency called just that when Admiral Nimitz passed away. And it's an agency that deals secretly with on and off planet threats, any threats to humanity, and it was formed in 1947 by the UN. So he was also commanding officer of our Deep Space Fleet, which I will describe more in a little bit, that protected the planet from all kinds of alien threats. He had an amazing ability to gather intelligence due to his numerous contacts. And he died in February of 1997, just several months before Mark and I met. But many times when I'm speaking, especially when I'm in England, he's right here. So I really appreciate that. Now we get to my husband. A little cutie. He was born in 1953 in San Rafael. Due to his father's military career and due to my husband's own military career, he's lived and worked and traveled all over the world. He knows how to fence. He was an expert in martial arts, learned several languages as a child. He could handle a gun at 3 because if you're going to be at the man of the house when daddy's gone, you have to know how to handle a gun. So he was around personnel and equipment with his father from a very young age. And his father would often have him go and test the security of a particular base. He was allowed to play in ward rooms and map rooms, and he always picked up interesting bits of intelligence because nobody ever suspected that a toddler could remember anything that they were talking about, but he remembers everything. And he also went to many different meetings and bases with his dad. In July of 1960, the family moved to England, and I've had the pleasure of being in England in the area where they lived. It was near Banbury in the Oxfordshire area. He was stationed at RAF Croton. So while one of the outings that they had, they went to some secret base, and his dad was off at a meeting, and Mark was supposed to be watched by the airmen. Well, he always gets away from the airmen. So he was found later in a room with a bunch of code machines. And he was having a great time, and he was hearing all kinds of messages. And his dad finally finds him and tries to be stern and goes, you know, what are you doing in here, basically? And he's going, well, Dad, they're talking about being on the moon and Mars, and they're not talking about rocket launchings, and they're talking about people being there right now, not in the future. And that's 1960. Between 1960-61. So suffice it to say, my husband has been around aliens his whole life. The Raptors knew exactly when he was born, and they flew in a bunch of flying saucers in 2 months to the day after he was born and did a whole honoring ceremony with him as a baby. Yeah, the whole Lion King thing. And he's got a scar on his wrist to prove it. So this is him as a arrogant-looking teenager, because apparently he was. He started his military career while he was still in high school. He did some pretty secret or advanced training with the Navy while he was still in high school. At the age of 13, well, he was on was just a student while acting as a courier for his father, and he got caught up in the coup when it happened. In 1975, he helped evacuate people from Saigon, and after Vietnam, he came out from the Army and became a Navy captain, pretty young, I understand, and then was part of Air Force Special Forces, which takes in all branches of the military. His most intense work was from 1976 to 1982. Some of his missions included drug interdiction. Some included fighting aliens on and off the planet. He's operated many kinds of naval vessels and various aircraft, including an SR-71 and the Aurora, and numerous alien spacecraft. In 1978, he was assigned to the Aurora project, and he went deeper into that world of top secret stuff. He's highly educated. He's got 2 bachelors, 2 masters, and a PhD in poli-sci, and he's very close to having one in quantum physics, and he's working right now on a master's in astrophysics, just for the heck of it. He's a published writer. He used to be a filmmaker and a publisher. Now, most of you probably don't know that he was arrested in 1982 for a murder he had nothing to do with. Sorry. So he's been in prison for 35 years for something he hasn't done. The kids who were working for him killed somebody and said he masterminded the whole thing. And we now know that all those kids had New World Order ties somewhere in their family, and Mark was notorious for fighting New World Order type groups and people, and he pissed a lot of people off along the way. So that's why he's in prison, even though the state, you know, obviously the state's not going to say that. He's just in a California state prison. I'm thankfully not very far from where I live, but it's a good way to get him out of their hair and ruin his reputation. Because he was never going to talk, he was never going to say any of this stuff. When I met him, oh, I'm writing a family history for my kids. It's like, okay, and now look what we have. So one of the, this is an Orion class space battleship. In the late 50s, 2 scientists, one related to my husband, a tailor, and then Theodore Dyson, developed this rocket, or this spacecraft, and it was the size of a naval battleship. It was, in the early days, it was launched from Earth with nuclear bombs, hence one of the reasons why we stockpile bombs. And then it was never intended to come back to the planet, and they would also shoot bombs out like eggs to propel themselves in space. So they were meant to be exploration, and then they've been used to defend the planet numerous times. It was supposed to be a space shuttle type vehicle that would be needed to transport people to and from orbit. The Orion program could have been piggybacked on the military programs and existing civilian space projects. And Dyson's son did a lovely BBC documentary and wrote a book, that's where I get this picture from, the Orion project was canceled because the Apollo program was coming on. Well, the Apollo program was the civilian cover. I mean, it was real, it is real, but it was a civilian cover for the military's space program. And if you look at the numbers, and it's always good to follow the money trail works. But my father-in-law thought, well, it could also be used as a good weapons platform, and you could defend the planet easily. They were good for defending the Earth from attacks. Now, before 1979, they used chemical thrusters like rockets for turns, because they couldn't, they couldn't turn really easily. They didn't have force fields like SRIs or the Raptor ships. From 1979 on, they used a nuclear thruster. That helped. And then in 1979, at one of the missions my husband was on, he was going to be captaining one of the ships. They were testing his grandpa's antimatter drive engine. So that was pretty hairy. But the thing is, my husband's family has been involved with this whole Orion project since the early days. And they were actually, a lot of times they would park them over the South Pole and probably cause the ozone hole there. So here we are back to my father-in-law. He was commander of the Deep Space Fleet, and definitely it was a fleet. You had 9 battleship-sized ships and then several support craft. The flagship was called the California. It was like a World War II vintage battleship, only without gravity. And later it was upgraded with atomic rockets and added weapon systems. The crew wore magnetic boots so they could hold down to the floor. The largest crew area was in the form of a 1960s submarine. The bridge was much like being in the Star Trek, but a lot more padding and handrails. Some other ships were called the California. Well, the California, the Lenin, and the Dreadnought resembled giant erector sets gone mad. They were 800-foot-long plumber's nightmares of pipes and tanks and work areas and weapons and antennas. And I'll go back to the picture, but the crew area is very small compared to the whole size of the ship, because most of it's the engine and where you're storing the nuclear bombs and everything like that. The B-class ships were the Richelieu, the Bolivar, and the Valkyrie were visually cleaner looking, something like the HAL spaceship from the 1968 movie 2001 Space Odyssey. They were upgraded to like the A ships. The Valkyrie had been retrofitted over the years, and like I said, it had Grandpa's antimatter device engine and 4 new pulsar guns. And the Valkyrie is what my husband was going to captain in one of his missions. Then there were C-grade ships called the Shiva, the Shogun, and Zulu. They were all a bit smaller than the first 6, and they had a cleaner NASA-inspired design. And the Shogun had a number of Japanese-looking systems. Now, it's interesting to note that the US built 2 of these. Then you had France, Germany, China, Japan, Russia, and a couple of big corporations built and funded them, because just when you put them up, you still have to, supply them and feed the people that are going up there and pay for the people to get up there. So sometimes it's not easy to fund them. Now, from the report I have about a battle we're going to get into, but I don't know, has anybody here been in space? Okay. Well, my husband, yes? I can't see anybody. Okay. Oh, good. Okay. Well, my husband describes that there's some problems with navigation in space. It's not like, you just start the car and you go down the road. Number 1, how do you get there fast enough to make the journey practical in terms of human lifespan? Or how do you design a ship capable of traveling for centuries of real time? That was a real problem for a lot of scientists and for science fiction writers. The other problem is, how do you get them out there and get them back to the same place where they started from? That's not always easy because things move. And he goes into a lot of the science. In all his reports, he goes into a lot of the science and the history, so you really get a good physics lesson whenever you read his stuff. But you throw in, problems with navigation, gravity, solar wind, radiation, and the changing position of your target, and that just puts a lot of monkey wrenches into the navigation part. So it wasn't always like as easy as following a roadmap. And we've spent hours talking about navigating in space and being in wormholes, and it's just mind-boggling, and just understanding what space is really like, because it's nothing like I ever imagined. Let's see. And then he's told me that in 1979, when he was captaining this one ship, he said, well, we were still using slide rules for some of our computations. They only had computers for, certain things, but, they probably had computers on, Star Trek. But in 1979, they didn't have big computer systems on the spacecraft. Now, in 1961, in June of 1961, one of the things I love to talk about are interstellar treaty conferences that the human governments and militaries have had with different aliens that come here. And in June of 1961, when my husband was 7, just turning 8, there was the conference held in Devon and Cornwall, the southern part of England, and I've been there. It's a lovely area. Mark was one of the few human children that were allowed to be at this conference, with his little English girlfriend. Prince Charles was there, and those are probably the only human kids that were there. Prince Charles was only there for the opening ceremony, so that doesn't count. It was authorized by President Kennedy and by the British Prime Minister. My father-in-law helped organize it. He was head of security, so that's probably the reason why my husband got to go. And then let's see, the opening ceremonies were held at Buckfast Abbey, and I have actually been there. It's a lovely abbey in a small town. And then the different committee meetings were held all over the Devon and Cornwall area, depending on, what kind of creature you were, what kind of facilities you needed. So they had things coming in by air, they had things coming in by dimensional portals, they had things coming in from the sea. So you had to accommodate a lot of logistical issues and food issues. And there were at least 100 alien species that came, at least. And by 10 years later, there were at least twice that many. And you also had heads of state, lots of royal representatives. You had lots of government people. We had people there from the UN. Vice President Johnson was there. And I don't have my big list of names here, but lots of people were there. And then the thing to remember is after it was over, you couldn't talk about it. And it was, you were there on pain of death, you will not talk about what's going on here. And the thing is, things in England back in 1961 were not as crowded as maybe they are now. But the government has a way of shooing the public away and closing things off to the public, and then they can use these cool places to have these committee meetings. Now, one of the reasons why they have these meetings is because by 1961, we'd already been going out into space for years, and the aliens were not happy with us. Number one, we are way younger than they are, and so number one, they don't think we're sentient beings, or they didn't. They had a hard time with that. And they didn't want us going out into space littering and blowing them up and doing all kinds of nasty things. They were pretty worried about us. But my husband says the big reason for the present conference was that several treaties had been made with aliens since 1936 and none were being honored. The hope was that now a single comprehensive treaty could be ratified between the UN and the known alien groups, although Rich and many of the military men thought that hope was unrealistic. My father-in-law saw this conference as, putting a line in the sand, giving the military the legal ability to defend the planet if we needed to. And one of the problems that there was no one single agenda or resolve among the humans for their outlook towards the alien cultures. And a lot of people had never seen aliens that were coming to this conference, a lot of humans hadn't, and they weren't even sure that aliens existed. And yet here you have hundreds of alien species walking right in past you. And the Soviets and the US had already spent 20 years covering this up. So this is, big news to a lot of people. Some people, like I said, it was their first time for seeing aliens, and some people still thought it was fake. But it was not. And my husband, they had the opening ceremonies at Buckfast Abbey, and so my husband was there with some children, and they were human children and alien children, because he met several alien children who came with their parents, who were delegates for this conference. So he was running around the countryside on field trips with the kids. He just thought it was, I'm here, I don't care if they're not human, I'm playing with these kids and we're having a great time. So that's kind of fun to go in that part of England and see where they might have played and had their little outings. Well, I have been to Castle Drogo, and this, one of the things they needed to do, because not all aliens get along, and so they needed to keep them in separate facilities, because you didn't want to have any incidents. And that way, sometimes you had to keep their whereabouts separate from other alien species. Well, Castle Drogo is where at least one raptor family stayed. And yes, this is a drawing of a raptor. They descended from velociraptors here on Earth. This is their mother world. They completely honor this world as their mother world, although they have a whole empire out in space. I could talk for days about them. They're built for running and eating, and they have a nice long tail. They have really sharp teeth, but they also like ice cream and orange crush and a lot of they learn to like a lot of human foods, which does tend to make them sick. But imagine my husband is on there's this huge lawn on this side of the castle, and my husband's standing there, and all of a sudden he sees his dad walking across the lawn and this 7 to 9 foot tall raptor, her father. And of course he wouldn't have remembered meeting them when he was a baby, but my father-in-law and the raptor came up to him, and Mark's looking at the paws, which look pretty scary, even though he had them covered up with gloves. Now they have 3 fingers, and on their feet, the feet they use for running, they have kill claws, which will gut you in a second. So he described, and her name is Linka, Princess Linka. She is now the empress of their whole empire. So I'm going to describe, in my husband's words, their first meeting. Linka took a step forward, very slowly, looking up at her father, at first while making a sweet moaning sound. When he clicked once, she turned to me and very slowly took a few more steps towards me. I held out my hand, and she leaned down to sniff it. And then with her wet tongue, she licked my fingers and palm very gently, and her muzzle nuzzled my wrist. Hello, I said, watching her mouth very carefully. She made several short chirps, and then she raised the back of her right paw, and with the sharp claws closed, then they kind of did a hand bump thing. And that's how they shake hands, because obviously if they're trying to be your friend, they don't want to claw you. Her brother was with her, and I'll show you his picture later, but her brother grew up to be my husband's best friend, his best non-human friend, his best non-human friend. And they worked on many missions together, and in 1979, Craig died in battle. Now, as for some of the other aliens that were at this conference, somebody wanted me to talk about reptoids. Well, here's a picture of reptoids. But you also had several types of greys, and a lot of them work with the reptoids. And but at the conference, only the Zeta Reticuli greys went to the conference. And one of the problems was that a lot of the species were using the greys as their translators. And another problem for a lot of the aliens was there was a lot of hostile problems back on their own home worlds. And for some of them, they were taking a big risk to come to our planet to have this conference. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that the Nazis first started working with reptilians, before the war in 1936. And one of the reasons that the Arab states have been guided to hate the Jews was because of the centuries-old battles between the reptoids and the Jews, who the reptoids believed betrayed their secrets. Also at this conference you had Nephilim, which are very tall beings and they weren't very friendly. You had Yetis who were there acting as bodyguards because they, well, I think they're very friendly, but they will hire out to anybody apparently. You had different mantid delegations because the mantids were having a civil war back in their home world. Oh, and the other thing about the reptoids. Yes, they have a very huge presence. They have an empire out in space, but they have a huge presence here on Earth. They have a very large base in North Africa. I'm not sure if they have bases everywhere else, but, and I'm not going to talk about this part, but they, you know, they're backing ISIS at this point, so they're pretty nasty. Here's one of my favorite creatures. The guy on the left is a Gastro Cell. And when there's just one of them, they look like this shiny, oily blue blob. And their species is a chameleon species, so altogether they look like a cloud. So sometimes when you're looking at a cloud, you're looking at them. They're very friendly. They eat ammonia and methane. And one of them came to the conference early before their delegation came. It's one of their kids, and he had a message for the humans. And so again, my husband got to play with him, and he'd have to be encased in a big bubble because he wasn't used to being here. And they put a tube through the bubble and fed him his methane and ammonia. There were also several humanoid types that came to the conference. There were Pleiadians, Syrians, Aryans, all like subcategories of what we call Nordics. They've been communicating with the U.S. and the USSR since the 40s, and they were involved in the effort to keep the human race, help us survive, and they were not friendly with the reptoids. Now, one of the truths that Mark learned was that no single group has ever been able to gain enough power over everyone or anything. So you have a lot of New World Order groups. Thankfully, no one group, even though the Illuminati is probably the most powerful, no one group is totally in charge yet. They figured that humanity would probably unite if everybody learned about ETs visiting the Earth, and the New World Order doesn't want humanity to all unite. So secret alliances were formed between aliens and humans, between different alien groups, and they've all decided to keep it all a big secret from all of us. Now, one of the cool things when Mark was there with the Gastro Cell is the Gastro Cell can astral travel, and so can my husband. And so a lot of times they would go out at night to far, far away, and they would go out to, it was either Jupiter or Saturn, where the Gastro Cell's community, they had a resort there. So Mark got to go meet their people, and so he really liked that. Okay, a couple of sites. This is Pendennis Castle in southern England there, and it was the site of one of the committee meetings, the Committee on Sentient Terran Authorized Rights. And when we get down farther, I've got a list of the committees. You also had Oceanics who attended the conference. And if you saw Arrival, I love that movie, but it reminded me because they had to build tanks for some of the water creatures to be in and look at each other and participate in the committee meetings. And they were like big fish tanks, but then they also, there's a lot of issues about feeding and providing them the right foods and the right environment so that they'd be able to participate in the conference. Now, Mark and Craig were very interested in what they called a crab-shaped walking tank that took up a sentry position. And what it really is, they're a squid-like creature, but when they're on land, they get in a bio-suit and it makes them look like a crab. But he's very good friends with them as well. And some of the Secret Service or the SAS men that were there told the children they'd seen creatures like lobsters, like squids, some were like dolphins, and some are known as the Nereids. So again, if you've seen the movie Abyss, another one of my favorites now, that lovely, not a jellyfish, but the lovely creature with the lights that you can see through that the guy finds way down deep in the ocean. Those things are real, and they're interdimensional, and they're wonderful, and But again, the oceanics, none of the oceanics are necessarily happy with us because we pollute the oceans. So, not good. But there's lots of different kinds of oceanics. They have their own agendas. Some are friendly with us, some are not, and mostly because we do pollute, we pollute the oceans and we inhabit their areas, and they don't like that. But we've had war with them many times. I think even in the 40s and stuff, that was part of it. And then in the 60s, when the public thought we were, nuclear testing at Bikini Atoll and in the South Pacific, we were definitely dealing with aliens. So the Nereids, which are kind of remind me of the creature in Abyss, they wanted peace, as did a lobster creature that goes around in the crab suits. There is an octopus-looking species that's not very friendly towards us, and they've been mad at us at least since World War II. There's a creature called the polymorphs, which look like dolphins, and they were not convinced that we could be trusted either. So this conference lasted about a week. My husband was there before the conference, I said playing, and then the conference, and he wasn't at very many meetings. But the decision that they made that week to guide the exploration of space would influence global security for years to come. Many of the alien species at the conference did not want to allow us out of low Earth orbit, and there were just concerns about us, because some of the committee meetings were talking about, do we let them off the planet? Do we let them defend the planet? Should we sell them our used spacecraft? How much technology do we want to give them or trade them? How many humans can we kidnap in exchange for the technology that they want? A lot of issues going on. And again, as I said, we have a problem about littering space, and they weren't happy about that. We also have the habit of shooting first, asking questions later. And they don't really want us knowing where they live out there. And I was reminded, NASA discovered what they think is a habitable planet called Tripsit or something close to that. And, Mark said, the things that live there are not happy that we found it. Because they don't, part of the treaties is that we're not just going to go tell everybody where they live, because the military knows where a lot of these things are.
Travis what?
Thank you. I knew it was T. Thank you. So my father-in-law was pulled into 2 committee meetings to give advice on defending humans from alien abductions, because he was against that. And he wanted to rebut the reptoid theory that humans could be used as breeders and as lab rats. And as I said before, many species didn't consider us as being sentient species. They consider us to be dangerous, hairless apes. And a lot of the politicians and the military men realized that humanity might be in a lot of trouble. So a lot of species use human females for breeding programs and for sex slaves. A lot of them want females' breast milk. The reptoids are the largest consumers and the largest kidnappers, and they kidnap the largest number of human females, and the Greys help with a lot of that. And the Greys help selling us off to different species. We're for sale for the highest bidder. But thankfully there were a few humans at the conference who, were putting up a fuss about this. But I can tell you that I've learned that there are governments and corporate groups who make deals all the time, not for our good, with different aliens. I'm going to give you a second. I don't know if you can read that. These are a list of some of the committee meetings that they held. I'll tell you just a few. Claims on planet Earth. Continued use of terrestrial environmental resources. Human interstellar political standing. Limits of interstellar communications. Limited use of space by humans. Sentient terrestrial authorized rights. Now, one of the big things that came out of this conference is that they banned communication between human civilians and aliens. No radio, no laser, no ESP. Technically, we're not supposed to have any communication with aliens, whether we want to or not. We could all be under arrest if we get found out. I know people who still do talk to them. And the average human has no idea how hard it is to communicate with aliens. Most of them don't speak English, if you can imagine that. And if you say something in the slightest wrong way, you could set off an intergalactic incident. And I have this great quote. And just so, the SETI project was developed as a front so that we would think the government was trying to communicate with aliens. I have this great quote out of this report about communication. So consider, how do you communicate with a species that looks like a slug, that's as big as a hippo, can spit acid, and has no speech or hearing as humans understand it? The fact was that there were far more creatures out there among the stars than there were that looked like humans. What do you say to a life form that was no more than a plant, but an animal, and was shocked to come to Earth and find that we eat plants? What do you say to an insect that saw no reason to communicate with humans in any way other than getting the message across that everyone needed to get in line and start walking that way, and they're sending them to a slaughterhouse because they're going to be lunch for those insects? And these were just some of the examples of hardier life forms that can survive out there. Moving to the next thing. And I love the quote at the MUFON Symposium. They had a quote on the homepage of the event about the secret space program, humans and aliens working together. This next little part is just that. When my husband was still in high school, the summer of 1970, he got to go to Bamburgh Castle in northern England near Yorkshire, where there was a Raptor training center set up for humans and Raptors to train to be in the Raptor Imperial Fleet. And it was at the order of the British government. And the hope was to create a working bond between the Raptor Dragon Empire, not to be confused with the Dracos, because they're not similar at all, and the humans. And this program was to be a big step in that direction, and my husband got to be a part of it, as was one of Dean Martin's sons. So Bamburgh, and I haven't been there yet, but Bamburgh was the perfect place for the Crown to hide alien visitors. It's easy to keep uninvited humans out if you didn't want anybody to see the aliens there. You've got the ocean, you've got a flat beach, you've got rolling meadows, and huge places for landing and parking alien craft. What could be better? So here we have Bamburgh Castle, just right on the edge of the coast there. And the cadets attended classes. They trained in simulators. They were to participate in a real-time war game out in space. They received training in the suppression of enemy space defense, space strike, space operations and surface warfare, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, tactical command and control, and reaction to emergency situations. Now, again, as a boy, this was fun for my husband. He just loved it. Although there were a number of Raptors who didn't think it was so great to have a human be part of their officer training. Because they don't like to think of humans as their equals. And in the Raptor training, you're all considered equals. Now, just like hopefully our U.S. military officers, the Raptor officers were expected to care for their forces, to properly train them, and to properly prepare them. And they were expected to make right choices and, above all, win wars. Love this. This is from Jurassic World. Raptors at their finest. The Imperial Fleet believed in lifelong education, or career-long education. They studied American Navy history, and they learned about adapting at sea because it's space. Being in space is like being on the ocean. The responsibility of the Space Warfare Officer School was to train the personnel to seize initiative, to make rapid decisions, and demonstrate sound tactics. Now, Admiral Arleigh Burke once asked, what's the difference between a good naval officer and a great one? Anybody? 6 seconds. That can be the critical margin between life and death. And in 1970, the American military apparently had gotten into a sad state with the concepts of honor forgotten, and the Raptors are all about honor, and that, my husband, is just a picture of, Carrie can tell you, he walks into the room, and he's every bit the honorable Navy officer that he was going in there. He's not the tallest man in the room, but I'll tell you, he's the most honorable man there. The Raptor commanders were expected to be a cut above others. You were expected to live up to a very high standard, even if you were a stinky human. And this was hammered into cadets at all times. Now, have any of you seen this movie, the Jurassic World? Thank you, I loved it. I need to see it again. Well, just like in Jurassic World, the motorcycle scene through the woods and the Raptors are running along with this guy. And this guy looks a lot like my husband. But my husband trained with the Raptors. He would ride his motorcycle and they would run in formation, getting as close to him as possible, being in formation. And by the late teens, he and his friend Craig, they would run 50 miles an hour, the Raptors, 6 inches from his motorcycle handlebars. They're always hunting, and when they get a scent, they're very drawn to it. And something to remember if you come across Raptors, don't ever feed them indoors, and don't try to teach them manners, and do not run behind them after they've eaten. But the fun thing is, I have not that bomber jacket from the movie, but I have my husband's bomber jacket that he would wear riding with the Raptors. And there's probably Raptor DNA on it from little guys chewing on it. So now it's time for them to go out to space for their big war game. They were supposed to go out near Saturn's moon, with an icy moon with subsurface oceans. They knew they had to be alert for some privateers who had bases on Titan. Their teachers taught them that space was not a forgiving place. And Mark's girlfriend at the time told him, something's going to happen while you're out there and it's going to change everything. However, Mark never turns his back on duty. And the special relationship he was building with the Raptors depended on that. And part of their final test was to see how well the cadets, human or not, could leave their loved ones at a moment's notice and do their duty under stress. Now at Menwith Hill, up in Yorkshire, you have this wonderful top secret base that was built for humans and Raptors. It was a cooperation base where the humans from the US, the UK, and NATO worked with Raptors and other alien species in an effort to keep peace in the solar system and on Earth. It had extensive ground satellite stations. It was communications, intercept, and missile UFO warning site, and it was the largest electronic monitoring station on the planet. Well, Prince Naga, who's Craig's father, he had just received some intelligence that the war games might be at risk because there were some trog pirates, and I'll describe trogs later, but they're an insect species. And then Naga was at Menwith Hill with Rich, and they were watching what their sons were doing from a big screen. So these are, this is a moonstorm. This is an upgraded version of a ship my husband was flying for these war games. He was flying something called a Moon Dart. It was out of date, but it worked just fine. The Moonstorm is a newer ship that he actually flew the next year. Now this is a picture of him and Craig is the Raptor, and there's a manta. And the funny story is that they were at Windsor Castle. Their dads were in a meeting. The queen liberated some sheep for the Raptor and the mantas to eat, and they found some wine somewhere and helped themselves. And they were trying to play football and couldn't find the football that was right behind them on the path. But anyway, I love that story. My husband's, laughing at it or making fun of himself, so that's okay. So they go out on a mission, they go through a portal coming out over Saturn's North Pole, and he said the end of every jump was more than a bit harsh on the human mind, as reality itself seemed a dream state at one moment. And suddenly your eyes beheld one of the greatest visions of our solar system, Saturn at close range, with its rings and moons in all their glory. My husband will not tell me how far out in the galaxy he's been, but it's farther than Saturn. Everything in space is moving all the time. You have to know where you are at all times. You have to know what your goal is, or you're going to get lost. And believe it or not, aliens go on vacation, and there are alien cruise liners out there in space. And there was one that was, on vacation showing the tourist Saturn and stuff, and they passed it, thinking nothing of it. So one of the rules of the war game was that no alien civilian was supposed to see their ships because they might think an enemy was approaching. So Mark decided they would go to a secondary training area, and it was technically off limits because it was too close to the rings, but he doesn't let that bother him. So they had a formation of 3 9-ship Vs. They deployed some targeting drones. Their training zone took its shape. It was all a holographic war game they were doing. The battle scenario was supposed to test all their skills. And the enemy was something called a commune Class 1 attack fleet, and they were supposed to take that carrier out. So Mark, being who he is, didn't just use all the Raptor cadet training that he taught them some human tactics, which actually helped them win their war game. And there was a big explosion, and they didn't lose any of the Raptors, or the cadets. So now, they're feeling pretty good about themselves, and yes, just like Star Wars, there are places out in space where you can go relax, and it has a bar and a place to sleep, and so they went to this support ship. And they were resting and unloading and everything, and it was also a weapons and munitions loading facility. And thanks to the equipment that was on that ship or that facility, they learned that the Trogs attacked that cruise liner that they had just seen. And it was full of innocent tourists. So, Knights of the Cold War stands for something because you've got to go save the innocent women, children, tourists, whoever they are. The Trogs had come out of their base, attacked the liner. They were knocked out the engines. They were attempting to board it. Thankfully, the tourist crews fought them off, and I don't think they got in. None of the tourists died. But Mark and his cadets, they all went and attacked the Trogs. And they had a full-scale attack going, and they were doing pretty good. And then right at the end, thankfully, a Raptor heavy cruiser came in and helped finish off the Trogs. But they went to the cruise liner, looked after the passengers, and none of the passengers were lost. Now, of the original 22 Raptor crews, 27 Raptor crews, 21 crews survived. Mark wrote they had lived free, full lives and died fast as great heroes of the Empire, bringing fame and wealth and honor to their clans and families. What more could any dragon ask for? And yet you can't help but think how much we had lost with their passing. These are my friends, more so my brothers. And just know that the reports I have for most of these things are very long, and so I'm just giving you little tidbits. So, there's so much more to share. But the year after this training, in October of 1971, you had another Interstellar Treaty Conference. This time it was held in Persepolis, Iran, under the cover of the Shah putting on an elaborate party for celebrating the 2,500-year anniversary of the Iran monarchy. So you had all these royal heads of states, royal representatives go. The Queen of England did not go, but I think Prince Philip and one of the princesses were there. But you had a lot of politicians again, and you had hundreds and hundreds of alien species. And thankfully, everybody that was there as a human civilian was in the know about aliens because, it was a conference. But you have these elaborate parties, and you can go online and see some of the pictures of the parties that were going on. And this is just like the opening parade or something. It took several years to organize this. My father-in-law was head of international security by then. He was directly involved with organizing the conference, and he's always in charge of security. Mark is now an young adult, and he worked with the UN security personnel. Now, they built this beautiful tent city. It's actually 50 tents that were prefabricated luxury apartments with traditional Persian tent cloth surrounds, and they were arranged in a star pattern. And there was a big fountain, and trees were brought in. And there was a large tent of honor where they did the reception and everything. And the catering services were provided by Maxime's of Paris, who shut down their restaurant for 2 weeks to take care this conference. Now, the report I have about this, and I have 4 parts of it back on the table. Right now, I don't have part 6 yet, but I think it's done. Each part is at least 1,000 pages long, and it includes like all the different families that were coming because their husbands or whoever was a delegate, where they were staying, you know, what all the mischief the Raptors got into in England when they were just waiting for time to go to the conference, what some of the scientists, aliens were doing and checking out and doing archaeology digs, all the beginnings or the pre-event activities that were going on, and who, you know, all the sabotage that was attempted and all the kidnapping attempts that were made. It's pretty amazing. So one of the other this is a replica of a cat species that looks like a panther. They're very tall. This was found in a German cave, and it's very, very old. But my husband knows a Contessa Leona who's from this panther species. She isn't actually an archaeologist, and her husband was a great military leader of their species. I don't know exactly where they're from, but she comes to Earth. Their species have been to Earth a lot. She comes here to explore different places to see evidence of where her species has been. And Mark said there's over 20 cat-like species in our arm of the galaxy alone. And at the time of 1971, her big job was to find evidence, because there were like 9 species who all were saying, oh, we created the humans, no, we created the humans, no, we created the humans. So she was going around trying to find evidence of who might have created the humans, and also to she was going to present that at the conference. And what she discovered was that no alien species alone created us. Many have helped us survive and thrive, but no one alien species created us. And then we have this really cool creature called, I can't pronounce their names, but they're war beetles. They're a caste of beetles. They have like a queen who's really big, like big trucks, think really like a semi, or maybe not quite that big. The war beetle caste is maybe like the size of a big pickup. And they could dig really fast like bulldozers. They can think and they can ask questions. They have also like a worker caste, and they're communal. They have the Zen-like religion. And they can also, at least the war beetles, can belch plasma from their throats if you're threatening them. So that's a pretty cool feature. Then we have a really cool dog species. And these guys came to the England conference, and Mark met them. I think he didn't meet them at the England conference, but he met them at the Pitt conference. But in 1961, they were given permission to establish a base in Australia, which they have, and apparently it's pretty large. But they are a merchant species. They export commodities, not humans, like chocolate and Rolex watches and lovely silks and fabrics and jewelry, because aliens like that stuff, apparently. Their homeworld is only 9 light years away. They're very friendly. They know a lot about space. They've been friendly towards us for 54,000 years. They would like to have communication with humans, because then we could become their clients. They can't speak human languages if they have an operation on their voice box. They're very concerned about germs, as are most aliens. They do not kidnap humans. They're very well known for their medical care. And like I said, they consider themselves very fine merchants. They have a pretty elaborate fleet out there. And their females are very protective of their young. And they also they were very concerned about the kidnapping attempts that were happening before this conference happened. Another creature, kind of like the Gastro Cell, but it's called the Vapor Wisp. It's a cloud-like creature. It understands the fabric of space and time. They're experts on dark matter, and they can interact with dark matter. And it says, while the Vapor Wisp, this is from an international security report, while the Vapor Wisp looks to be a little more like a 2-meter-long cloud of smoke, they are close to being a truly quantum creature, in that they seem to be able to feed off dark energy, and in moments of panic or need, they can slide between dimensions. So that is an overview of where the conference was held, so you can see the star pattern where the tents are. Now, unfortunately, there were a few problems that were happening even before the conference happened. There was one alien shuttlecraft that was sabotaged and crashed near the conference, and the creature that was on board was a human sex slave of the non-human ambassador, and she warned that there were species who were intending to not honor the treaties and were intending to harm us, especially if we got full rights for space. There was also an AI threat to infiltrate some of the human delegations. And fortunately, or unfortunately, but fortunately, one night while Mark was dream walking or astral traveling, he spied a ship that was waiting to launch a probe. It was a worm-generating torpedo. It had I know this sounds weird, but it swallowed a neutron star and it was hurtling it towards Earth. But thankfully, we're all here because they fixed it. It took them till the next day to get to it, but personnel from several ships, several species went and took care of this problem. So another cool species is a one-dimensional species called the Flatlanders. And as the men were all getting ready to leave on their ships and go deal with this bomb, the females are consoling each other. And these Flatlanders come into the tent and, you know, they travel like as a pack, I shouldn't say pack, but they have to be a group to have any real form. But they would have the ability to stop the bomb. And they were communicating with Mark's girlfriend. They're very friendly towards us. They don't believe in self-ownership. They operate with a communal mind. So they decided they would transport to Mark's ship. So all of a sudden on Mark's ship, you've got this thing coming right through the hull and like, you know, right in their face. And I guess it feels and looks kind of weird, but they were able to work with it to get to the problem. So the upcoming adventure that they had dealt with wormholes, gravity tubes, faster than light travel in space, the risk of dimensional movement inside a wormhole, and they had to know how to use warp fields. So the Raptors were quite familiar with traveling through wormholes, but we're not allowed to share that. I don't know that information because they don't want it out there. Now, Mark was flying a moonstorm in this mission, and this other green thing is somebody named Thorn, that was his ship. So just two examples of other species ships out there. He said that in 1971, the bases on Mars, that's one of the few times he'll mention Mars, they were important because of the tracking systems. That would be one of the ways that the forces could be guided to the correct location of where to find the bomb, and then act as a power source to get back to us. You had a lot of moonstorms that came alive, and other species had their ships, and they all went up. Now, what's interesting, and Mark loved they outfitted his ship so a human could sit in it, because Raptors don't sit the same way humans do. So in Göbekli Tepe, which is in Turkey, elementals, if you know what they are, it's like the fairy realm. They opened up a portal, and then those great dog species, the Canonians, were able to attach a wormhole to it, Stargate, so that the ships could go through there. And Göbekli Tepe was a spaceport. There's lots of landing sites or pads with sculptures and carvings of different animal species that used to use it. And it's interesting to note, he says, by 1971, we had a star map with exact locations of alien worlds. The advanced species who didn't trust us, didn't want us to have contact with those worlds. We already had jump gates that our witches had held for centuries. We could lob nukes at targets in the galaxies if we wanted to, and that was not acceptable to the aliens. So again, most of the times when I'm reading these things and my husband's about to die, or you think he's going to die, he always pulls through. But the ships, you know, you got to go up, and then what was interesting is that the portal that was opened up was only a few yards above the surface of the ground. So they're taking their ships, and then they're going right to the ground. It looks like they're going to go right into the ground. It's like reading this is kind of, I can't imagine it, but it's just amazing. Anyway, It's hard to read that your husband's ship is about to just go into the ground and now magically they go through this hole and they're out to where they need to go. And to make a long story short, with the help of the Flatlanders, the elementals and all the aliens who worked together, the mission was a success. You know, one group helped, they were able to direct it and make it go down some wormhole, and who knows what civilization got blown up, but Earth was saved. And they were able to save humanity another time. Now, the general outcome of the conference was that we made a lot of large protective changes for humanity, but the aliens demanded that we stay earthbound for 50 years. And this was 1971, so you might remember that the Apollo program stopped shortly after that. I think I met one of the last astronauts, or an astronaut like for one of the last launchings. The collective still saw humans as a weak link in the budding efforts at a confederation of sentient species. Rich and Naga made deals with friendly aliens in a long-range hope that to getting the human race out in space, because they felt that was important. In one committee, they helped many species see the logic of allowing humans to move forward and to make it illegal to use us as subspecies to be enslaved or used as lab rats. But in the military aid development on Earth committee, they would still discuss what the aliens would be allowed to barter, give, or sell to humans in the way of military aid. Everybody doing okay? Now, 1976, and sometimes there's gaps in between the reports that I have, because one thing I always tell people is my husband does not break his U.S. military secrecy oaths. He's often worked for the UN agency and for other governments, or he's got information where he can talk about it, but maybe he won't talk about his personal involvement. But he still has a lot of information, but sometimes there's gaps because it's stuff he can't share. And there's a lot of, I mean, I know a lot of stuff, but there's a lot of stuff I don't know, which is fine with me because I'm still alive. In 1976, I was in my early 20s, there was a battle over China and a battle in the Antarctic. And we had a reptilian species, it was kind of a rogue faction of the Raptors. They were working with the Nazis at their base in the Antarctic, and they had planned to set off a round of big earthquakes to destroy several civilizations. And so a 7.6 earthquake went off in China, or happened in China, in Tangshan, China. And the night before that, a lot of people saw lights and sounds and all kinds of weird stuff in the sky. And back then, you didn't have, CNN rushing to the news scene. You didn't have people with cell phones or people with video cameras all over the place. And so you had a lot of witnesses to this weird stuff going on in the sky, but they didn't know what it was. And this whole process was to cover up that they were kidnapping thousands of people to take them out to space. Now, my father-in-law was commander of a mission, or the mission to the Antarctic to deal with the Nazis and the reptilians, and my husband was in charge of the air battle over China, because what happened over China is that you had 2-mile-wide portals open up in the sky, and an invasion fleet was coming through. So just remember that. But down in the Antarctic, my father-in-law and his troops go in there, and the Nazis decide it's not a good idea to be working with the reptilians, so they went back to help the humans. So that worked out okay, because they were our friends the next year. So at the time of this mission, my husband was an officer of the U.S. military and the UN. His assignment, like I said, was to be in charge of the air battle over China. His personal spacecraft was our friend Minerva, who is an alien technology living craft that came from far, far, far away. He won't tell me where. I don't even know the name of her species that built her or grew her or whatever they did. She raids stars for her power. She uses a mind. She doesn't control him, but they use a mind interface, for lack of a better word. He could just think, and she knows what he's thinking, and she knows what he wants him to do. He's basically the only human that she's allowed to fly her. She forms her own gates. She can shapeshift. She can be a scientific exploratory vessel. She can be a war machine. She's a fascinating ship. Minerva stands for Multi-Interdimensional Nominalistic Energy Repulsion Vehicle Accelerator. And I never hardly say that. She accepts no limitations. She exists to survive. And like I said, she can be an exploration ship or she can be a warship. She's taught Mark a lot about space. She accepts no past, present, or future. And I was reminded that she's similar to the living craft that David Adair talks about. The first man who tried to fly her died. And it was impossible to hide what was going on over China. And the battle that Mark was in the first 5 minutes, they lost 80% of their men, and they hadn't expected so many enemy craft to come in. And so this is one of the flying saucers that the US had, but Mark and Prince Naga headed into the oncoming fleet and had this huge battle, and he said the ship seemed to come alive, anticipating not only my next command, but foreseeing that the next enemy move and taking the correct actions to prevent their success in every attack of feint. In seconds, my expectations and foreknowledge of enemy tactics and traditions increased as the ship communicated vast amounts of information while we performed dramatically over China. So then to wrap things up, they flew each of their spacecraft into one of the portals, detonated antimatter bombs so to close the openings. It also killed everything that was on the Trog ships that were waiting to go through them with thousands of kidnapped victims, unfortunately. But that ended that attack. And they went out through wormholes to I don't know where, because he won't tell me. They lost a lot of their men, but again, the aliens lost a lot of theirs too. And what's amazing to understand is that these battles only take seconds, and it's over. And I don't know how we're doing on time, so you'll have to let me know. The next year, Mark and his dad were involved with something called the Battle of the Harvest Moon. There was another alien plan to attack our base on the moon, and yes, we had a base on the moon, and invade Earth. And there was an invasion fleet of reptilians, some form of raptors, I guess. They weren't always not all of them were our friends all the time. And I think some insectoid species. The report reminds us that the moon is not a friendly place. We had military personnel that were remodeling the Copernicus moon base. Part of their job was to gather scientific data about the moon. And we were also planning to put up a huge telescope so that we could start seeing more and more of what was out in space. Now, some of the squads were inside a dome complex located near Tobias Meyer. They came under attack by an insectoid species called the Trogs. There were also a shape-shifting species on the moon called the Jotun, and they are natural shapeshifters. When they're young, they could be like the size of a small rock. When they're older, they might be a big boulder. They can be whatever they want to be. Just their size depends on how old they are in Jotun years. Another squad was attacked by the Jotun, and that was before the invasion fleet got there. So the invasion fleet was in position, including a Raptor Imperial Fleet that was waiting by Mars. And it was planning to attack the moon base near the Copernicus crater. They were going to use neutron weapons on it, which they did. One thing that bothered the reptilians was that there were unknown spacecraft shooting up from the ocean that they could not identify. They moved so fast that the reptilian advanced technology could not track them. Now on Earth, all hell had broken loose. Out in the Soviet fleet, submarines around the world reported strange sonar readings and sightings. Naval intelligence was on edge because so much information was coming in. And within 12 hours of my father-in-law's communication with his underwater friends. There were dozens of UFO launches from the Pacific and South Atlantic that came to our aid as they were going to be fighting this fleet. The enemy fleet moved into striking distance of the human targets, the moon being their first attack point. They shot neutron weapons at the moon base. They killed our Marines. And what a lot of people don't know is that there's one of the Rockefellers, and I think it's David, I'll just call him Colonel. He was supposedly died in 1962 or something like that. Well, he wasn't dead. He was working on the moon. But the Marines, he did die then. The Marines died. It was a horrific way to die. Let's see. Okay. Now, this is the fun part. As the enemy turned their attention to the Earth, my father-in-law set his plans in motion. As his task force raced to engage one part of the enemy, human forces on the moon started to track and attack the more distant attack forces that were coming. Then strange orders came from his ship, the California, in German, to seemingly nobody to launch an attack. Suddenly from behind Earth, remember a year before they were fighting the Nazis and now they became our friends. Well, out from the Earth comes 4 squadrons of Nazi saucers and their 4 support motherships. And the newly secretly organized battle plan unfolded. So you had underwater craft coming, you had Nazis coming, we had a lot of help, and we're still here to talk about it. Now, as my husband reported, and this is in the Soviet Union, like up in the steppes region, there's a lot of space debris apparently. This amazing battle that took place had the appeal of some movie epic, as the best science of a dozen civilizations smashed into each other with violence so brutal and without pity that one prayed that it was a creation of fiction. Thousands of lives were lost in seconds, and the ships that had cost an entire income for a planet for a year exploded and imploded before their crews knew that they'd been hit. No scientific paper or military report could do it justice. This was the ultimate dogfight with the ultimate rewards going to the victors. And the whole thing was over in less than 90 seconds. So with the help of the Oceanics and our Minerva, the Valkyrie made it to its target, and it successfully rammed a Trog ship. It went into a mad roll, leaving no survivors. Mark's ship also went into a tumble, but the Oceanics were able to get it under control. The fleet arrived 6 hours later, and the battle was over. And I'm not going to talk about it unless we really have time, but in 1978, the next year...
About 20 minutes.
Pardon me?
20 minutes.
Oh, 20. Okay.
20 or more, I mean, Q&A,
Okay, yeah, that's good. Just keep me on track.
Oh, I got you.
The next year, and I do have a report about it, there was a UFO crash in Bolivia, in Tarija, between Bolivia and Argentina. And Mark was involved with that. So that was pretty fascinating too. But we're going to move to the Battle of Vesta. So Vesta is an asteroid between Mars and Jupiter. And in August of 1979, my husband had just gotten married, and now he's on his honeymoon in San Francisco, and he gets the call that he's got to leave. And his wife was clueless about any of this stuff he was involved with, because she thought he was just a contractor. Little did she know. So there was going to be like some kind of alien conference out by the asteroid, and our deep space fleet was sent there as they thought there would be some problems. There were alien observation bases on Vesta and Pallas, and Ceres this was a headquarters for a Nordic race called the Aryans. And in a nutshell, let's see. Well, we also had they had some really cool weapons called quantum ubiquity atomic destabilizers, quad big cannons that could be aimed towards Earth, and that's what the bad aliens wanted to do. But they were in to defend things out in space. But on the way, so here's some of my husband's friends that he worked with. They were new astronauts at the time. Ellis and Onizuka, David Griggs, Ron McNair were with him. And this mission, they were with him at the rescue mission he was at in Dulce a few months later. 2 of them died in a shuttle accident, one of the 2 big accidents. David Griggs died in a mysterious car accident. And at the time of this mission, my husband was like the youngest UN officer, and he was also a commander of a Raptor squad of SRIs, short-range interceptors. Now this is, I don't have a picture of the trogs, but this is the closest thing that reminded me of them. They're 8 feet tall, or they're 8 feet long, 6 feet tall. They're a cross between a mantis and an ant. They're pale green or brown. They have 2 pairs of walking legs. They're one of the most cunning, sadistic, dangerous creatures in our arm of the galaxy. They are black marketeers. They come do raiding parties to Earth, take humans back to sell us off. They also have vast mining operations out in space. One of my favorite parts of this report is that my husband had a first contact with a really cool cat species, and this is not what they look like, but I don't have a picture of them, and I can't pronounce their name. But they're very tall, they have wings, they like to dye their fur, they sing, they hum, they communicate telepathically, and they were very friendly to my husband and his crew. And after this mission was over, 4 of them came back with him, and they're at some embassy somewhere on the planet. So instead of the conference, you had the Trogs attacking the asteroid, the Nordic base on Vesta, and they were planning to turn those big quad weapons on Earth and attack Earth. And in seconds, our deep space fleet engaged in a battle with them. You also had you had the Raptors helping, and the British had great Spitfire, I think they were Spitfire 10s they called them. They were their secret spacecraft. They came and helped. And again, the battle didn't last very long. Again, my husband almost died. This was like the first one of his reports that I ever read, and I was like, ugh. So our leaders, learned, and we won, and they were feeling pretty cocky and sure of themselves. They learned that there were several bases on the Earth that seemed to be more than just small scientific facilities. The Trogs and other collective members were using these bases as collection points for captured humans. Now, the Deep Space Fleet survived to fight another day, and pretty soon they'd get another chance to do what they did. And the next mission that I know of, just a couple months later, was their rescue mission at the base in Dulce, New Mexico. Now, I'm going to end on time. Look at this. One piece of history that Mark told me about. Oh, I've got 2 little things. He just sent me some articles about Russian UFO sightings. And one that he wanted me to pay particular attention to, it says, on July 12th, 1982, 4 days before he was arrested, so the date's going to stick in my head, Soviet cosmonauts were able to observe an unusual drop-shaped object on the monitor screen of the Salyut 7. It flew ascending between the orbital space station and the Progressor 14 craft. The object could have been the size of a spacecraft, and this was written by a Soviet author. And I was told that this type of craft is something that Corey Goode describes, and Mark has told me that it is a secret space program craft. And there was something else. Oh, the other thing I was going to share was that Mark said a lot of times, because I never thought, oh, there's, well, who's manning, who's in our secret space program now? Because I've always believed that, just because he's out of the picture, there still must be somebody doing something. And he said now, a lot of times our military guys, when they've seen stuff, because especially lately, a lot of our military actions are involving aliens on the ground. A lot of times they see stuff, they're traumatized, and they're given a choice to either be mind washed, and they won't say anything, or die, or they could go volunteer with the secret space program. It's like, huh. And a lot of times there might be accidents of helicopters, like in Louisiana, or there might be other training exercises where people are told, their families are told they're dead, Well, they've just volunteered for the secret space program, apparently. So, before we get to questions, there's a quote that I always use now at the end of my talks. It has nothing to do with the secret space program, but it was a quote given at the Iran conference in 1971 by a 300-year-old Raptor senator. The galaxy's greatest spiritual thinkers from every sentient species have taught the wisdom of seeing beyond the appearance of lack or limitation, because they recognized the natural perfection at the heart of all of life. They saw the greatest possibilities. They knew that wholeness, beauty, peace, and harmony were always present and would express if recognized and embodied. These spiritual masters saw their world with eyes of wonder and awe, even if they had no eyes. They teach us that we lack for nothing. Each of us is part of a universe that is so abundant that it is impossible to count or comprehend the reach and richness of it. Infinite means never-ending, never ceasing, always replenished, always greater and more, beyond imagining. You have access to the infinite. Your nature is part of the divine, and the divine is ever-giving, ever pouring forth with anything and everything that is needed. The universe would not exist if it were not a self-sustaining and continuously expanding system. Each sentient life is part of that system, and you partake of its nature and composition. Like the water that makes up most of the human body, the infinite abundance of the universe is inherent in and as you. There can be no separation or a canceling out. A defeating of both would happen, and nothing would exist. Thank you.